You're listening to the 30-second broadcast of TBR Radio's TBR History Hour, with your host, TBR contributing editor, Dr. Edward DeVries. On today's show, Dr. Ed talks with publisher Dave Gahary. Dave specializes in republishing books that have already been banned on various platforms around the world for challenging the official narratives on subjects including the JFK assassination, the moon landing, the banking system, the American Civil War, terrorist events, mass shootings, and the Democrat agenda.
For years, you have written for the American Free Press, you've written for the Barnes Review, you've been writing for other publications, and now for these last however many years you have been in the publishing business, you have been a publisher. And so how did you transition from being the person who was writing for a number of publications to being the publisher?
But so how did I get from AFP to that? That's funny. I was thinking about that just yesterday. Somebody had asked me about that, and not somebody in our arena. I think it was because one of the authors I knew, he was about to throw in the towel, and I talked him out of it. And I think it was because of that I began in it, and then it progressed. And being in the arena that we're in, I got to meet pretty much everybody, and there were some people who already had books published, who had approached me, or I had approached them, and it just grew from that point. I mean, there are 4 publishing companies. One is Money Tree Publishing. Started out with The Host and the Parasite by Greg Felton, and then added The Synagogue of Satan by Andy Hitchcock, and then Andy's other book, In the Name of Yahweh, and then Greg's other book, Exploding Middle East Myths. And then we just added another book just last week, the week before, called Hellstorm by Tom Goodrich. And we also are offering the movie of Hellstorm, done by Kyle Hunt, the DVD, and also the audiobook of Hellstorm, which is narrated by Paul English from Eurofolk Radio. And so that's one of the companies. And then another one of them is Moonrock Books, and those are books primarily compiled by Jim Fetzer, who is pretty well known because of this whole Sandy Hook matter that turned into a lawsuit. And
I was going to say, Alex Jones, I just read the other day, apparently the lawsuit against him took a turn for the South just the other day. The judge's last round of decisions in that lawsuit basically don't look good for Jones.
Right, okay, yeah. It's going in that direction, and it happened with the lawsuit that we were involved in. Of course, one of the fathers of one of the Sandy Hook victims sued my publishing company, which has Money Tree Publishing, Moonrock Books, and now Turning the Tide Publishing, which we'll get to in a second. And Jim Fetzer and this other guy, Mike Palachek, who was on the books, still is, but he really didn't have much to do with the publishing part of it, or even the writing part of it. And he's out of it now because of the lawsuit. But Jim had decided to fight it. The only defendant who was required to hire an attorney was my company, because companies can't represent themselves pro se. So Jim and Mike represented themselves. Believe me, we tried like the Dickens, especially me, to get representation for them, and it was virtually impossible because no one wanted to touch it. And that's just a sign of the times. It's not like America used to be, where people would actually fight for rights. The Bill of Rights. It's not like that anymore. So, that in that lawsuit, the lawyers that I had urged me early on to settle, and I was not going to settle. because I felt that it was a free speech matter. And then the way that it progressed, and I got more deeply involved in it, it seemed like their advice was proper because it was going in the wrong direction. And so Jim Palachek, the other fellow, he settled as well, and Jim decided he would not. And because he didn't, the judge ruled against him, and then it went to the jury only for the purposes of damages, and the jury awarded the Sandy Hook father, Lenny Posner, $450,000. And on top of that, there were some contempt issues that Jim was involved in, and that led to him being fined first $7,000, and then in the last contempt matter, an additional almost $700,000. So he's now on the hook for over $1.1 million because of this lawsuit that was brought at the end of November in 2018, where the plaintiff, Lenny Posner, asked to have one chapter excised from the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. And that's how this whole thing started. So the matter isn't over. Jim has appealed it. He was able to eventually get counsel, and he's appealed it. And if it is decided in his favor, the appeal, then of course I believe everything gets reversed. But a lot of the damage has been done.
I was going to say, and he'll still have spent however many tens of thousands of dollars in attorney's fees and.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And he already, is or has to abide by the court's orders, and they are trying to, of course, collect these awards, the 450 by the jury and the now around 700,000 by the judge, ordering that Jim is liable for the attorney's fees of Leonard Posner, who hired a huge law firm, actually a couple of law firms, but they all did it pro bono. So he actually didn't pay any money for it, but the way that it is in Wisconsin, there is precedent that even though someone might be represented by a law firm and not pay them, that the other side would still be liable to pay, and that's what happened. So it's not over though, but it's still ongoing. Moonrock Books is still functioning. I imagine if I didn't settle, it wouldn't be. Right. Would have gone in the wrong direction. So there's 10 books in Moonrock Books.
So before we go on to the next publishing company, I want to ask you: do you think that there are a lot of journalists, or I'll call them aspiring journalists, because maybe they're not actually doing things because they're afraid of things like what has happened there in this whole Sandy Hook debacle? What happened to you and to others there? Did it basically just, in other words, these things are strategic on the part of the government and on the part of others, essentially to keep those of us who would, be honest journalists and truth tellers from being honest journalists and truth tellers?
You mean, yeah, there's a chilling effect, of course, but I don't think it's applicable to quote-unquote journalists, because as we know, as we are painfully aware, there is no journalism from the mass media anymore. It's a joke. So they move in lockstep and they sing from the same choir sheet, and they would never give a fair shake to our side in a million years. They're just not designed to do that. So it's not so much journalists who who might be afraid of reporting on something. But as I mentioned earlier, lawyers who are vital, to the system, they might be and are, because I've been involved in this for a while, and there used to be lawyers who had guts and who would, stand up for someone, like Edgar Steele, like Sylvia Stoles. These are people who are not afraid, weren't afraid, and they did what's right to protect individuals using the law. And we see what happened to Edgar Steele and Sylvia. And, that's a problem. That's a big problem. The lawyers.
Well, I don't know if it's happening in the United States yet, but I know in Germany they're already to the point, and in Europe they're to the point that if a lawyer wins a case that the government wants them to lose, and the lawyer has the testicular fortitude to win it, they simply disbar the lawyer.
Yeah. Well, here they put him in prison. Yeah, it's not good. It's definitely not good. We're not going in the right direction. So, and besides lawyers, you've got then the sleepwalkers. Those are regular people. I call them sleepwalkers, which some people said that, geez, that's the wrong term, because, that means that they could be woken up.
Yeah.
A lot of these people can't even be woken up. But I still call them sleepwalkers. And of course that will, trickle down to the sleepwalkers and what they think about, certain events like this scamdemic. It used to be a plandemic, now it's a scamdemic, because it's pretty clear to everybody that it's nothing but a big scam, which they're obviously pulling off. But I think that that's a big problem, because it's not so much the bad guys are the enemy, because they'll always be the enemy, but it's your neighbor who's the enemy, because your neighbor is so stupid that, they refuse to open up their minds to understand what's happening. So I'm afraid that it's not so much the journalists or even the lawyers, but it's your neighbor who is just too close-minded, that they won't even entertain what needs to be entertained.
So I want to ask you one more thing, and then we definitely want to look at these books that you're publishing. You had said that you went to work for American Free Press back in 2010, which means that for the first 5 years that you were working there, Willis was alive, and so you had the privilege of working under a Willis Carto. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with Willis.
Yeah, Willis was obviously a legend. I didn't know until later on how much of a legend he was and how much of an impact he has had on all of our lives, because obviously the media, when they don't want to talk about somebody or something, they just quarantine it, and or they'll talk about it in disparaging terms only, which is what the media did with Carto. But Willis, one of the things that really had an impact on me about him, of course, besides the fact that he was the man pretty much solely responsible for the right wing in the country, and he was a decorated World War II veteran who had a Purple Heart because he was wounded in combat against the enemy, just like the USS Liberty guys. They got 208 Purple Hearts because they were wounded in combat against the enemy. The thing that sticks out to this day about Willis, and I tell people about this, was that one day I had the opportunity to go over to his home. Him, myself, and Pete Papaheraclis went over to, well, Pete actually suggested it to Willis, and that we all go back from the office to his home. And his wife was not there at the time. She was out away, I don't know where, but traveling somewhere. And so we drove from AFP to his home in Virginia, and we hung out, and we had a couple of drinks and a couple more. And boy, Willis was not a big guy. He was very slight in build, but he could put it away. And we were drinking, I think, straight scotch. And we drank until we couldn't drink anymore. And then, of course, the next day was, for me anyway, because I'm really not a drinker, the next day was kind of rough for me. Not for Willis. He was up early, and he was cooking a country breakfast for all of us. And the main thing that stands out to me about him was what a gracious host he was. The way that he wouldn't let me, now here's a guy in his 80s, he wouldn't let me do anything, like get up, get a napkin or a drink or some orange juice or whatever it is, more eggs, or he insisted on getting up and doing it, which, like I said, to this day, it's incredible. He is, and I know a lot of people. I've met a lot of people in my life, and I've been in a lot of situations with people, and he is clearly, or was, sadly, the most gracious host I've ever met in my life. So that's what I remember about him, is how a guy in his 80s had the class to take care of his guests.
I've heard a lot of great things about Willis, but that's the first story that I've heard that I guess was on such a personal level. And, that's probably one of the reasons he was such a great, as far as in publishing and business, in leading the conservative movement and so forth. I think one of the reasons that he was so successful probably, Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. In other words, what's in us comes out. And,
Yes.
Probably part of the reason why he was such a great leader was, because, as you said, obviously he was just a great man. Jesus even said that, let he who would be the greatest among you be the servant of all. And, obviously maybe Willis had tapped into that spiritual truth. And we saw the fruit of it. You saw the fruit of it, obviously, that day you were a guest at his home, but even... now the rest of the world kind of knows why he was such a great man. So
Yes.
yeah, so I really appreciate that story.
Yes, it was. He was a great man. Of course, I wish he was still around, because we need somebody like him.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Open your web browser and type in www.barnesreview.org and discover the Barnes Review magazine. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There is no more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review magazine in its print form, or in convenient electronic delivery. Our host has been a subscriber to both formats for years. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review.
All right, now that we're back from that commercial, let's go ahead and get back on the subject of your publishing companies and the books that they're publishing.
Yeah, I was just saying that, that was the Moonrock Books publishing imprint, and there's 10 books there. Of course, the book about Sandy Hook was removed. That was part of the agreement that I would remove the book Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, and one of the other books is gone, which is the New Gutenberg Press that was pulled by the author. There were just too many things not right about it. So that's Moonrock Books. There's 10 books there, and Money Tree Publishing, there are 5 there, I believe. And then, of course, Turning the Tide Publishing, which was created to accommodate books that would not fall into the category of the books that were already in Moonrock Books, which were Conspiracy, and Money Tree Publishing, which were more geared toward talking about Israel. These books, one of them, as you know, Blood Money, The Civil War and the Federal Reserve, Side Effects Death, which was on Money Tree Publishing, but it didn't fit there, so we moved it over here. And then a new book that we have there that's not a typical book that we carry, but it's from a former Marine, and some people say, or many people say, once a Marine, always a Marine, can't be a former Marine, but a Marine vet who became an anti-war figure.
You say once a Marine, always a Marine. My grandfather,
yes,
my grandfather had spent 22 years in the Marine Corps.
There you go.
And he was out of the Marine Corps before I was even born.
Really?
And yet he had apparently he'd retired from the Marine Corps just days before I was born. But even as an adult, because I was living with my grandparents when I was in college and things, and my grandfather would wake up every morning at 5 a.m. He would shine his shoes, he would polish his belt buckle, and he would run 5 miles.
Oh, jeez.
So when you say once a Marine, always a Marine, I know that mentality.
Yes, that's true. So this guy, he approached me to publish his book. It's like a philosophy type book, and so we did. So that book's there. There's some more books that are going to be added to this imprint, Turning the Tide Publishing. A few books on this scamdemic, and some other books that talk about like secret societies, the Masons, Freemasonry, and so on. So that's going to be added shortly, and some other books as well that are already in print but are looking for a new home. So we'll probably be adding this year another, I would say, 6-7 books, and there are other ones in the works as well, but all of this, of course, takes a lot of time to put together. And then the other publishing company is the one on the USS Liberty, and that was really precipitated by one of the survivors contacting me in 2015 and wanting to do something. And so out of that came the 2 books that are there, Erasing the Liberty and Holocaust on the High Seas. And of course there's a t-shirt there as well. So we've got 20 books, t-shirts, and a DVD of an adaptation of the book Hellstorm turned into a movie by Kyle Hunt, and then the audio book of Hellstorm by Paul English.
Extra, read all about it!
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.amfree.com www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net. And find out about the American Free Press. Do it today.
Extra, extra, read all about it.
So why did you set up so many different publishing companies instead of just having, one big name that would be all encompassing with all of the titles?
Yeah, there is one company that, maintains three of them. When the company is Wrongs Without Remedies, and that maintains the company's Money Tree Publishing, Moonrock Books, and Turning the Tide Publishing, and then Erasing the Liberty LLC, that maintains Rockstar Publishing, which Rockstar was the call sign for the Liberty. And as I mentioned earlier, certain books would not fit into categories that were already in place. So whereas a book about, let's say, Israel, the Synagogue of Satan, that is not a conspiracy book. That's a book of facts about this entity that a lot of people would like to learn about. And so that wouldn't fit into Moonrock Books, nor would it fit into Turning the Tide Publishing. And conversely, a book like Blood Money, the Civil War, and the Federal Reserve wouldn't fit into Money Tree Publishing, nor would it fit into Moonrock Books, because it's not a conspiracy book, and it's not a book about Israel. It's a book about, obviously, what instigated the so-called Civil War.
Right, but you take a company like Simon & Schuster, and they publish books under 5,000 different genres, and yet they can do it all under one umbrella. So I guess that's why I'm asking why you set up a plethora, like, in other words, a different publishing company for each individual genre of book, rather than just having one big umbrella and putting everything under it.
Yeah, I guess that's. I know I didn't think about it in those terms, but Simon & Schuster, I guess they do have various imprints that they have different genres under. So I think it just evolved that way, and I think that's the end of the different imprint names, because in Florida, where the company Wrongs Without Remedies is an LLC, these other publishing companies, Money Tree Publishing, Moonrock Books, and Turning the Tide Publishing, are what's known in Florida as fictitious name companies. That's what they call them here.
Okay.
Other states call them like DBAs, doing business as. So I think that we have enough genre imprints that whatever we publish in the future will be able to fit under one of those three.
And so tell me about some of the individual books. We've talked about the different publishing companies, and you have named off some of the titles that are under them, but tell us about the books specifically. I don't know if we start with Hellstorm, because that one's come up a few times, and of course Tom Goodrich is known to a lot of our listeners, or if you want to start somewhere else, that's fine too.
Yeah, sure. I'll start at Money Tree Publishing. I think I talked about The Host and the Parasite, how Israel's fifth column consumed America by Greg Feldman. I think that's how this whole thing got started. And of course, that traces the Israel lobby, the power of Israel in the United States. And Greg's thesis is that the United States is pretty much a hollowed out husk of what it used to be, because Israel has, implanted its tentacles into the country and took it over, which obviously there's plenty of evidence for that. His companion book, Exploding Middle East Myths, is a series of essays that he wrote over the years about Israel. Synagogue of Satan by Andy Hitchcock, pretty much everybody knows about that book. And that book was banned by basically everybody. And, Amazon, Lulu, whoever, they all banned it. And then Andy had approached me and asked if I would publish it, and that's how that got started. Both of those books, or all three of them so far, and Andy's other book, In the Name of Yahweh, I copy edited all of them. So they're all formatted in a different fashion from their original form, and they're all softbacks, paperbacks. They're all 6x9, and Andy's book is very popular, and I think about maybe a quarter of all of our customers are non-US. So a lot of them are in Australia, a lot of them in the UK, but we do ship to pretty much everywhere in the world. Of course, this scamdemic has interrupted that, because there are some countries that are still not open for business via the USPS, but the UK, Australia, we don't really get much business in the Mid-East. We have, not Israel. I think one time a book has been sent to Israel, but a few times in the Mid-East. European countries, yes, Italy, France, Hungary, Poland, the Balkan countries, Japan, Korea, Iceland, Finland, Norway. So pretty much all over the world. I don't think we've ever been to Russia or China, but I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Few in South America, New Zealand, a lot of business there. So it's good to offer these products to everyone, and that's the idea. These are books that have been banned because of the grip, the media, including the publishing industry. So they shut down Synagogue of Satan, which we call SOS. We call these books by their by short names, like Synagogue of Satan, SOS, Host and the Parasite, Host, In the Name of Yahweh, Yahweh, Exploding Middle East Myths, Myths, Hellstorm's Easy. The movie that we offer on the site by Kyle Hunt, that was banned by YouTube and Vimeo. And you have to ask the question, why would an historical film be banned? Why would they need to ban it? Well, they need to ban it because they don't want the Germans portrayed in a favorable light. And that's exactly what that would do. This is how evil and disgusting these creatures are, who prevent people from learning about history. So that is Money Tree Publishing. And if we look at Turning the Tide Publishing, we have Blood Money, which you know about because you interviewed Jack Graham, and that actually was just written about by Paul Craig Roberts. He did a series of articles on his website about Blood Money, which he considers to be a very important book.
Do you know Paul?
Yeah.
Do you know how to get in touch with him?
Sure.
Because I would love to have him on the radio one day.
Sure. No problem. Could do that.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, and he actually wrote in the last article about Blood Money that he put on his website, he said, in the last paragraph, he said, seldom in 100 pages counting notes has there been so much information on how we have been deceived and used, and how we can retrieve our fate from the hands of bankers. Graham's monograph, In a Real Free Society in which all explanations were not controlled by the establishment, would become the catalyst for a new investigation of the war of northern aggression and its consequences. So he was very much enamored with the book, and he promoted it, and then it got promoted over on that UN's website as well. So a lot of people came into contact with it, and us. I mentioned the philosophy book, From the Mundane to the Metaphysical. and the book Side Effects Death, which I mentioned earlier, that was moved over from Money Tree Publishing. That book has its beginnings from the author, who is since deceased, who approached me to publish it, and it was already in print, but he was looking for a new publisher, and it took a while for me to agree to do it because I was just too busy, and I finally had agreed to do it, and just as we got it done, the fella passed on. It was sad. So that book details this guy, John Verapin's experience working in big pharma and how business is done, how you bribe, or how they bribe people in the health authorities of certain countries. Matter of fact, he bribed the head of the Swedish health authority to get Prozac approved, and that's where Prozac had its beginnings, in his bribery of this particular fella. So it's a good book to see how they operate, and what they're going to do with this vaccine for this flu, this scamdemic. Then Moonrock Books, that had its origins in Jim Fetzer approaching me in November of 2015, when he told me that Amazon had banned his book, Nobody Died at Sandy Hook. And that was in the days when banning was not, very well known. It wasn't done very often. And I was just shocked that the book was banned. I didn't read the book, but I knew about Sandy Hook. I had done some investigating on it and some reporting, and I had interviewed that former school safety consultant, Wolfgang Halbig, for American Free Press, and it was that particular interview that went viral somehow, and because that went viral, that actually put him on the map. After the interview was aired, because he gave out his phone number during the interview, he began to get calls from Europe because it was put up on AFP's website later in the day, and these people in Europe were wide awake, and they started to call him to share their feelings about the Sandy Hook event. So that was the book that Amazon banned after it was up there for about 3 weeks, and I didn't have anything to do with it, but they banned it, and they no reason given, of course, because they don't have to give a reason because they're Amazon. And he approached me, and I said, well, let's publish it. And that's how Moonrock Books started. And then 12 books later, and more coming. There are some more Moonrock Books coming. So it started with Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, and it's at 10 because Hook was removed, and so was Gutenberg. But there's going to be more coming on. So those are all conspiracy books. There's JFK books. There's books questioning certain mass casualty events like Parkland school shooting or the Orlando gay club massacre, or the Boston Marathon bombing. There's a book on...
I was going to say the Boston Marathon bomber just had his case overturned on appeal.
The death penalty. Yeah, this was just the death penalty part of it. They actually, his lawyers, had a problem with the judge ignoring bias from certain members of the jury, who, because the news was all over the place, they had already determined that he was a piece of garbage and he was guilty. So that's what it has to do with. So we have a book on that. There's a book on Charlottesville, which I actually wrote a few I contributed a few chapters to. And there's a book on false flags in Europe, a couple of books on JFK, and there's a book on the moon landing. And also in that book on the moon landing, there's, questioning the moon landing, whether or not it was real or not. There's parts in that book that talk about other things, like Paul McCartney being replaced, and also the Holocaust. And because of the parts about the Holocaust, that book was banned from Amazon. So out of these books here, these Moonrock books, the Parkland Puzzle, which talks about the Parkland shooting in Florida, is banned. Political Theater in Charlottesville, which talks about Charlottesville, that was banned.
Well, if I've learned anything from Rush Limbaugh, it's that radio is supposed to be entertaining.
Yeah.
And so I know this is not one of the weightier matters in the book, but why was Paul McCartney replaced?
Well, why did they say he was replaced? Because he died in a car crash. So these are, see, now this is the whole thing. Now, let me just tell you which ones are. So Parkland's banned, Moon's banned, Charlottesville's banned, Orlando's banned, and Boston is banned by Amazon. So, of course, we offer them. But this is the thing here, and this is what's important. People can have their own opinions. That's what makes a society healthy. But those in charge don't want that, obviously. And we're seeing it now more than ever, obviously, with this coronavirus scam, which is really bringing out their true colors. So my feeling is that if somebody wants to believe that Paul McCartney died in 1966 and he was replaced by a double, that's fine. I don't care. Doesn't affect me. If somebody wants to believe that the United States did not send men to the moon, I don't care. That's fine. Believe it. This is what it's all about. The Boston Marathon bombing was a false flag. Okay. Read a book about it. Make up your own mind. Don't ban it.
Welcome to the Christendom curriculum. Every parent who decides to homeschool wants to secure a great education for their child, while also saving time and money. But these days, many parents have another concern. They also want a homeschool curriculum without all the multiculturalist, politically correct diversity doctrine that's really little more than a thin disguise for an anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-Western civilization bias. Now there is such a curriculum. The Christendom curriculum gives your children a complete education in Bible, history, literature, and more, focusing on the classic academic skills of reading, writing, and arithmetic. But we also tell the story of Christendom, the story of the Christian nations, especially as Christ's kingdom has been historically manifest in the nations of Europe and America, and we do so without apology. The Christendom curriculum is the only Christian nationalist homeschool program you'll find. We support the right of the European and American peoples to their historic Christian cultures against the globalist leftists who want to destroy those cultures. Not only that, but we provide assigned reading courses for various hot-button subjects in our current culture wars, including feminism, social justice, and cultural Marxism, among others. These reading courses will teach your kids how to survive a social justice warrior attack, how to debate with leftists on social media, how to reform their local churches and communities, and more. We're living in a time of tremendous historical and social change. Christians have the opportunity now to begin building the culture and civilization of the next 1,000 years and beyond. It's an exciting time to be alive. So if you want to help raise the next generation of culture warriors, if you want your children to grow up with a love for Christ's kingdom and for their own nation, while at the same time learning how to defend America and rebuild the West, the easy-to-use Christendom curriculum is for you. Click the Learn More button to get in on the action. And thanks for listening.
For example, the moon landing. I personally don't believe that there ever was a moon landing. I don't believe that human life has ever successfully ventured beyond the Van Allen radiation belt. But, like you said, if you want to believe something else, that's fine.
Yeah.
But my point being is that the moon landing, denial of the moon landing, is all over the place in popular culture.
Yeah.
Which means that if the day ever comes that, the moon landing is, just absolutely refuted, it becomes, it just becomes a myth that can no longer be sustained. The answer can always be that the truth was always there, it was just hidden in plain sight.
Or banned or censored in plain sight.
And so, well, that's kind of my point, is you take something like the moon landing, there has always been opposition to anything other than the official narrative. But yet the discussion has always been there, and the facts have somewhat been hidden in plain sight. But now you take something like COVID-19, can you make the argument that the truth is still out there hidden in plain sight, or is the censorship just so strong now that the dissenting opinions are just not there?
I think that depends on what's going to happen within the next couple of months.
Yeah. And the same could be said of the Kennedy assassination as well, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There are people who, no matter what, they want to believe the government and they want to believe that media.
Yeah.
And those are the sleepwalkers, and, they're probably never going to wake up to, to the possibility that there are other options or other, outcomes.
Yeah. But if Kevin Costner wants to make a film, nobody stopped him. But I believe if Kevin Costner wanted to make a film and call it COVID-19, I don't believe it would ever see the screen.
Well, that's right. And the famous line is, "You're never going to work in this town again." So, yeah, that's right. So, I don't know about Kevin Costner, but
my point being is, there were people who could get their side of, be it the moon landing or be it a JFK assassination or be it, was Ronald Reagan ever really shot or was he never shot at all?
Yes.
Just pick your thing here. In other words, they could put out a narrative that ran counter to the official narrative, and while they would be discredited, they were still at least able to speak and get whatever they had to say out into the forum of ideas, if you will.
Yes.
But we don't even have open conversation or discourse in this country anymore.
Well, that's right. In reference to that, you're right. I think it's done. I think, free speech is dead. And it never really was something that most people cared about. There's a long history of, speech being suppressed, not just by the government or the authorities, but by the people themselves. There's a reason why Mark Twain, in his essay, the privilege, I think it was The Privilege from the Grave, is that free speech is best exercised from the grave. So it's best not to exercise free speech while you're alive, because there's too many repercussions. I think most people hate the fact that their neighbors can and do exercise free speech. I think there's, an incredible drive for these people, for them and others, to conform and not to exercise free speech. So I think now that the big tech companies, and I've been writing about this and talking about this for a long time, Section 230 of the Telecommunications Reform Act of 1996, which gives them the ability to be their own editors, the Facebooks, the YouTubes, the Googles, the Twitters, whatever these jokes are. They clearly have a left-wing agenda, and I mean, if people can't see that now, then there's really no hope for these people. So they have this agenda, and on top of it,
Facebook's employees are encouraging major corporations to keep boycotting their employers. I mean, in what world do you make sense of that?
Yeah, right, exactly. It's a recipe for real censorship on a scale that's never been experienced. I mean, I don't think that the Soviet Union was so good at taking people's opinions and just shutting them down the way that the United States, the bastion of Western democracy and free speech, has done. It's quite horrifying.
Hello, I'm Tom Strain, Lieutenant Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. The Confederate flag, Confederate symbols, and the reputation of our Confederate ancestors has come under attack. The Sons of Confederate Veterans is actively fending off our detractors, but there is only so much that we can do. We need your help. Contact your local, state, and national elected politicians and tell them that you will not tolerate these attacks on our heritage. You can also visit scv.org, download an application to join us in our fight to preserve our Southern heritage. Visit scv.org today. If you don't have a Confederate ancestor and you are tired of American history disappearing, you can assist us by becoming a friend of the SCV. Please visit scvheritagedefense.org and make a donation to the Heritage Defense Fund. We hope that you will join us in the fight to defend the Confederate soldiers' good name.
So, of all the different books that you have out there, which one do you think, if all of our listeners were to just buy one book, which one would you say this is the book you need to buy, and why is that the one they need to buy?
That's a tough question, because it would depend on, what they're interested in. If someone's interested in, the USS Liberty, then of course pick up, one of those books. If someone's interested in Israel and the effect that that country has on the United States, then you've got, of course, Synagogue of Satan or The Host and the Parasite. If someone's interested in World War II and the story, the untold story of what happened to Nazi Germany toward the end and the end and after the end of World War II, then Hellstorm is the book to get. Of course, it's not an easy read.
Well, nothing that Tom Goodrich writes is easy to read. If nothing else, he has even his articles in TBR that are only 6 or 7 pages long, I have to read 3 or 4 paragraphs, then I have to put it down, and I have to overcome the shock effect of those 3 or 4 paragraphs.
Yeah, there you go. So that's the thing. It's not easy, but it's vital that people learn about this. So they're banning these books for a reason, obviously. And the reason is that they don't want people to learn about this, because they're afraid that if they did learn about it, that their worldview would be altered. And then that would create problems for the powers who should not be.
Well, you talk about books being banned, and of course, so Amazon says, okay, we're not going to let you sell your book on our platform, or eBay says we're not going to let you sell your book on our platform. Barnes & Noble says we're not going to let you, sell your book in our stores. We're not going to put it on our website and so forth. But these books have to be printed, and unless you own the printing press, like, for example, you had mentioned Lulu, which is a company that a lot of self-publishers use to do the actual printing of their book, which means that there are people who own printing presses. They're not necessarily in the business of selling books, just of getting paid to print them. But they won't even let you pay them to print the book because they don't want to be associated with it, because they're afraid Antifa or Black Lives Matter is going to come and burn down their print shop.
Yeah. No, it's a problem. Fortunately, I'm not experiencing that now. That doesn't mean that it can't happen, but anything could happen at any time. I have a good relationship with my printer. I don't have my own printing facility. But yeah, we're good for that. But that could happen, sure, absolutely. And what else could happen is, and what did happen once, was that PayPal, who is the company we used as a payment processor, they pulled the plug on us last August, and we had everything through PayPal, and we never had any problems with them, and we're very strict the way that we run our business, and as far as like taking care of the customers. And so there were no complaints or anything. I think maybe we had one chargeback a year, which is from somebody complaining about something, but these were usually people who were buying the books to do that, to complain. So it wasn't that we had any issues with PayPal, it's just that was the time that they were beginning their censorship. And so they just pulled the plug on us without any warning, and we were left with websites with books that were unable to be sold because there was no payment processor. So that was, to me, very shocking, because we had this relationship with PayPal, and we never would have expected that would happen or should happen between two companies, that they would just, for no reason, just say goodbye. You're gone. We're not giving you 2 weeks notice, or we'll give you a month to find a new payment processor. No, it was just like, go away. And so that was shocking. That was a violation, and I tried to find out why, and because I thought it was a mistake, because why would they do that? We never had any issues. And then found out it wasn't, and then went searching for other payment processors and came up against the same thing, because by that time we were blacklisted, which I didn't know, and I never could have imagined that it would have happened, and it would have happened in that fashion. And so we finally found a company that dealt in what are called high-risk matters, which, books being high risk, and I made the joke at the time that the book can, pull itself out of its binding and attack people, like suffocate them, go across their mouth and kill them. Because how could a book be high risk? How could it be in the same category as, firearms, which shouldn't be high risk anyway, or, cannabis? It's a joke, that they would consider books being high risk, but we were forced to place our business with a high risk payment processor, which they take more money from you because it is high risk. So instead of paying a couple of percent, you're paying 2, 3 times more than you ordinarily would.
And that's where I'm going to go ahead and cut it, because we are out of time for this week's TBR Radio Presents, the TBR History Hour. And so I encourage you to go to our guest's website, www.turningthetidepublishing.com, www.turningthetidepublishing.com. If you just happen to have the advantage of listening to this on YouTube, you can see that right there on the screen on the show graphic. And you can also click like and subscribe. That will help our channel out considerably. Also, go to our website, www.barnesreview.org, www.barnesreview.org, and find out about the greatest magazine, I believe, that's ever been published, the Barnes Review magazine, which is the foremost revisionist history publication in the world today. And so we are out of time, but we will be back again next week, same bat time, same bat channel. If you didn't already listen to it, Dave was my guest on my other show, the Dixie Heritage Show. TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Show. And he shared with us a tremendous experience in his life the day that he met Hillary Clinton And of course, then I tell the story about the day that I met Bill Clinton. And so you'll want to go over there and listen to that as well. So from all of us here at TBR Radio, until next week, God bless.